everyone, this is Kate. Just interrupting to say real quick, you're going to hear in episode 2 that the sound quality for my side of the recording isn't as great. I had a different headset I was using with not as good of a microphone, but we loved the conversation so much that we wanted to keep the episode. So you'll hear a difference between the quality of the recording in episode 1 and episode 3. We hope you still enjoy it and let us know what you think. Thanks.
Hey everyone, welcome back. This is A Girl, a Guy, and a Buffy podcast. I'm Kate Balzer, one of your hosts.
And I'm Charles Swint.
Well, this episode, we're really kind of getting into the meat and potatoes of the format we planned for it in our discussion. Our first episode was definitely much more of a introduction, contextualizing Buffy in the period that it, came onto the scene. So we're tackling sort of our first big question in this episode. Do you want to tell them what that question is, Charles?
Yeah, so we're meeting our quote unquote big bad, and not that these ideas are definitely big, but they are not bad ideas.
Right, exactly. Metaphorical big bad, is that the right?
Yes, I think so. I don't want anyone to misconstrue our thought here, but we are going to be talking about feminism and gender throughout the season, and sort of like that being sort of the topic that we're going to be tackling throughout the season. And so for this episode, one of the things that we wanted to ask the question, is Buffy a feminist show?
And like so much about Buffy, the answer is kind of complex.
For sure.
I would say, for just to kind of jump straight into it from my perspective, based on the reading I've done on feminism and feminist thought, and preparing for this discussion, I would say, so my take on sort of feminism and feminist thought is that it's really about enacting a big systemic change. The first wave of feminism really tackled suffrage, getting the right to vote for women. And we're really talking about the Western feminism and specifically even U.S. feminism, as far as particularly history and waves. So just putting that in that context, because obviously that's what applies to Buffy as well. It's a U.S.-based show. She's an American, character, growing up in America. So, and then the second one is really about women in work and getting rights in the workplace and, sort of becoming much more independent, not dependent on a male figure, whether that's a father, a husband, a brother. And then that's the second wave. And the third wave is really when Buffy comes about. So it was kind of kicking off right about the time that the show premiered. So she's at the start of it. And that is really kind of what Buffy does. It's a lot of it is accepting the girly, the feminine, the female side of being a woman and kind of, saying, hey, what women did in the second wave of feminism doesn't really fit us. There's certainly different subsets of it. But I think that if you really look at the show, not until the finale and the choice to activate all the Slayers, which really changes a system within the show, I would say the show, by true definition, until that point, is not true feminist show. Now, that being said, it does a ton of stuff to promote representation, to show complex women. So there's a lot of great stuff, but I think it's much more on a individual basis, a cultural basis, not necessarily systemic change, if you want to go with a true sort of definition in that regard. That's just my take on it, which, I'm sure you ask 100 people, you'll get 100 different arguments.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there is definitely an argument for it not to be a feminist show, and that and I think it also depends on the moment and the view, of whose side of what side of the story you're looking at each week, and I think that it sort of shifts. I think it's one of those shows that is fighting for feminists. Like it's fighting for those things, and understand, like breaking through and finding new ways to accomplish what this new wave of feminism and feminist thought are trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely struggling to do that, and it doesn't always get it right. Um, but nothing. But when we're in fighting for something that's right, it gets messy, and it's always going to get messy.
Yes, exactly. And there's never one answer. It's not a black and white issue as far as like this is the definitive answer.
Right.
Fighting for right, any sort of activism, social justice. It's complicated and messy. And there's, multiple parts to it, kind of going into like intersectionality. You could certainly make an argument that like a certain way, pathways of feminism, obviously Buffy really focuses on white female characters and white female characters growing up in the suburbs. So that's,
Right.
going to be totally different than somebody else's experience, growing
Exactly.
up, of a different ethnicity, a different race, a different location, whether you've been living in America, your family's been living in the US for multiple years, or you're a first generation immigrant, that all adds to the complexity of the issue.
Right. And I think you kind of see that we start to see glimpses of what that looks like.
Yeah.
When when Kendra comes into the scene where we meet Kendra. So here is a person of color who is a Slayer, and her experience, and where she's given up her family, and she's completely given up her identity as a human being, as a person of color, to do this thing that Buffy almost takes for granted. Like she didn't, while she makes sacrifices and things like that, she did not give up herself, and she did not have to give up all of who she was in order to be the Slayer, in the same case that Kendra did, where
Yeah,
Kendra gave
exactly.
up all of who she was to be this thing. Her family, her friends, and like her clothes. Like
Yeah.
it's her shirt. It's her only
That's
shirt.
my favorite shirt. I
Sure.
will not do her accent.
Yeah, it's my favorite shirt. It's my only shirt. Like
It's my only shirt.
that's what she has.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, this again gets into that complexity of like context and, plays an important part in it. Comparing Kendra to Buffy, the other part of it is that Buffy was undiscovered until she actually became a Slayer. I think,
Right.
I don't remember said outright, but certainly it's implied, if not said outright, like, oh no, because it is kind of, she said that it's, like it's a huge thing in her family and in her town and culture for like to be selected as a Slayer. So like everybody knows.
Right.
And, so like as soon as I'm sure was discovered as like a potential, she was taken away and given to her watcher where, so that's part of it too. Like she never had the opportunity for agency and to grow up without that part of the Watchers Council ruling her life. I mean, Buffy got, what it's never talked about in the show. So you can come up with your own theory, whether that was done on purpose by the powers that be, so she could become the Slayer she is, or, it was a fluke. Whatever your reasoning is, obviously they never state it specifically. I like to think it was because that was so Buffy could become the Slayer she is. Like, I think it's a huge part of how she became the Slayer she is.
Right.
Because she could grow up, quote unquote, like with a normal life. So she kind of had the, even though she was kind of that, came off as like a Cordelia-esque high school girl before becoming the Slayer, I still think there was the underpinnings of like who she was at the core as a human were allowed to develop because she didn't know she was a Slayer until it actually was activated.
Right. And I mean, and when you look at when you start to look at characters like Cordelia, which I think again, like she's such a complex character. But again, she knows who she is, or at least in the moment she does.
Yeah.
Like she has sort of this air about her. But I think one of my favorite lines, which I just was just watching, but and Band Candy, when they're
Mhm.
talking about the SATs, and she's like, I do really good on standardized tests. And like my favorite line of hers is that, what, I can't have layers? Like, yeah, she's this like typical sort of like mean girl high school student, but she's also very smart and very intuitive and can read people and can stand up for herself and has many complex layers. And just like her saying that is like, what are you looking at? Like, what do you mean I can't have layers? Like like that line right there to me speaks volumes about what they're trying to do, is that yes, these female characters are multi-layered. They are not just one thing. They are not a
Yeah.
monolith. They are not just a trope. They are all of these things and so much more. And they are messy, and they are don't do things right. And that's okay, because that's what being human is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the most interesting part of the show is the sort of the complex characters, the messiness. I know the horror as a metaphor for problems, particularly in high school, is one of the things that's most talked about the show. But I would say that's my favorite part of the show.
Yes. Yeah.
To me, that's what keeps me coming back time and again. It's because you really get to know these characters. You get to love them, their layers, their flaws, their achievements, and that's what makes it's so special and so empowering as a show.
One of the things, this was something that I never really thought about, but when I read it, I thought, oh wow, it really is true. Is that I think one of the things too that sort of changed Buffy, or sort of like was a subconscious, or it was a conscious thing, but sort of something that maybe you thought didn't pick up on, was that they never really exploited Buffy's hotness, like how attractive she was. She was like, the clothes that she wore were age appropriate. They were, she was always well put together and she always looked good. But there was never like slow pans up of Buffy and like, and like weird, cleavage shots of Buffy and like all these like, or any of the women in the show. Like there was never like the male gaze.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in preparing for this discussion, there was definitely at least one or two articles that I was reading that were more in the pro Buffy as a feminist show that said the same thing, and I would agree. In fact, actually, I feel like they again flipped the script in that way. Again, whether that's feminist or not, but in like the episode "Go Fish," when Xander comes out in the Speedo. They totally do that sexy pan up, and because the girls are like, "Who's that hot guy?" And then they're like, "Oh my god, it's Xander!"
I mean, and that is there is a full on crotch shot of Xander. Like that is a slow pan across all of it, all of him. And they do it with Angel too. They do it with Angel. He's always like shirtless and naked and sweaty all the time. And you're like, geez.
Yes, particularly in season 3 when he's brought back. And I'm like, wait, he's shirtless again?
Right. Why does he just not wear his shirt? Like, and like even him when he comes back from hell, and he's like full on naked. Like he is just naked on the floor.
Well, and then Spike in season 6. Like he's always the one who's like shirtless or naked.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely sort of flip the script with the male gaze on that, where like we're literally just gazing at men all the time, and just ogling them and looking. I mean, and it's good to look at. I as a young queer boy, I was not mad at it. I was kind of like, okay. Pause, rewind, pause, rewind. These things happen.
That's very true. And even when there was like sexy moments, it never felt gratuitous.
Right.
Like, like the Buffy quote unquote sexy dance in season 2. I mean, I think it's more like weird than sexy because,
Yes.
like the context of it. Or like, Cordelia arriving back at school after she got injured, and fell through the stairs and got her injury after discovering
Right.
Willow and Xander cheating. And she comes back in this like kind of sexy leather pleather, deep wine outfit.
Right.
And, pulls up in her Corvette and her convertible and gets out. And it's like, it is kind of like, ooh, Cordelia is like back, but it's more like badass Cordelia's back. It's not like,
right.
This is there's a little bit of, not that there isn't a little bit of like sexiness about her because it focuses on her, legs as she steps out of the car, but it's not in a way that you would like see nowadays.
Yeah.
Or, may have seen in other shows.
Yeah, there are no like slow motion like the only time that they do that, and even when they did do it, like it was all very tongue in cheek when in season 7 when Xander's doing Buffy the Slayer of the Vampire, like, and he's talking about all of them and they're like posing in the kitchen and the wind is blowing in their
right, like the romance novel
and the soft,
of, like,
very soft light.
Yes.
That's happening, but they're like holding cereal boxes and it's
and that's
very
like
cheesy.
fantasy. It's
Right.
not like, yeah, and they're all like, Andrew, you're ridiculous.
Yeah, and so it's
So
just
true.
yeah. So they never while the women were, they were, you know, yeah, they're just never. I never felt like they were exploited in that way on screen.
Agreed.
And then they never like none of them necessarily had to trade on their sex appeal either. Like it was like they never used sex as a weapon. Faith did.
Right. But it was not necessarily looked on as a good thing.
No, it wasn't. And it was, but it was also because, but I also believe that was very character driven.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it was almost done like immaturely because of all her, the impact of her growing up she had experienced, and then,
right.
all the emotion, losing her watcher and then being betrayed by the supposed second watcher who's not really her watcher.
Right.
Post. So yeah, it's like sort of her fallback, like defense mechanism. It's not like,
I don't know but there is something different about how she does it. And I think that it's again, not gratuitous, because she's smart and she's, and she's just she's able to manipulate a situation, where she doesn't necessarily have to use those things. She has so many other assets that, that she can use.
Yeah, definitely.
And then anytime there was any sort of anytime any guy did sort of make weird passes at them or anything like that, like it was usually met immediately with retribution. There was usually some consequence to that happening. So even if men were making inappropriate comments or doing things, like even if Xander did it, like there was always a look or someone, or Buffy or Willow or Cordelia were like, Xander, that's not cool. There was always some sort of like, you can't do that, or some physical thing. I think there was somebody said something about how Buffy was dressed or something like that, and where she broke the guy's nose.
Right, and Go Fish. I was just thinking that
Go
one
Fish,
where like he tries to sexually assault her.
Yeah. And she just like, nope, not happening.
Yeah, exactly.
You've chosen the wrong one.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the show certainly makes the point in multiple episodes that that's not acceptable treatment or behavior.
Right.
And that, there's usually consequences. And it might not be traditional consequences. It might not be, depending on the level of behavior, if there's like, it's at an assault level, like they might not be arrested, but like in Go
Right.
Fish, they turn into like fish monsters and now have to live in the sea and are never like have a normal human life again.
Right.
Or like Anya's form of
Right.
punishment.
Where, you're a slug,
Yeah.
I'm gonna, yeah, for eternity. So I think, there are definitely points to be made that it is to be made that it is a feminist show, or definitely a female empowering show,
Yes.
which could be, at least in my opinion, it could be a blueprint or a guide, not necessarily a blueprint, but a guide to how we should be behaving and how we should be treating people, and that these are the consequences behind that. To the counterpoint, I would like to sort of toss out a counter argument.
Yeah, go
if
ahead.
I may.
Absolutely. That's why we asked the question. We didn't say yes, this is.
The counter argument is that the relationships between the females, between the women in the show, the females, that sounded awful, between the women in the show, were not always uplifting. I mean, there was absolutely Buffy and Willow to the core, which was sort of, gave us that core, oh, this is what friendship should look like. And this is what, for the most part, non-competitive um and like mutually supportive friends look like in almost every aspect of their relationship, except for a couple of times where they get into it. um but the other women in the show, there's always some sort of rivalry or competition between Cordelia and Buffy, between Cordelia and Willow, between Glory and Buffy, between Drusilla and Buffy, between Harmony and Buffy, between, so there's a lot of competition and rivalry in there, um, between that, so that there's an argument to be made that, that it's not, that there's a lot of like female competition that happens. Like if you look at like the freshmen in season
Yeah.
4,
Yeah.
you know, um, and then like Buffy's roommate, and like there's a lot of times where she is having to fight women, because they want to take her power, because they are jealous of her, because they need something from her, they want something from her, and so they fight her to get it, as opposed to working with her. And even when they're on the same side, like with Cordelia, even though they were like fighting towards the same end, a lot of times they were often at odds with each other, like in the Homecoming.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like they kind of develop eventually, I think, somewhat of a respect. But even like when Cordelia goes on to Angel, there's always sort of like snide comments she still makes about Buffy and the whole like Buffy Angel, relationship. And so I think that, I don't know if that makes it like not feminist, but it certainly is like they never reach a friendship stage. There might be some mutual respect.
Right.
For sure. Yeah. But there's always that sense of like competition, or seeing like, I'm sure as Cordelia develops feelings for Angel, his relationship with Buffy is sort of always an underlying threat, even if they're never going to be together, because it was like presented as this like great star-crossed love.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes like, it's mixed. That's part of the complex messiness of it, but I think you're right. There's less, if you like kind of break down the analysis, there's not as much like women coming together to support each other. I mean, the strongest is probably Buffy and Willow's friendship, and then Willow and Tara.
Yeah, absolutely.
Until the end of the show.
Yes,
I think
until
that
the end.
To activate, and that it's two women who do it, that Buffy comes up with the idea, has Willow enact it, and makes all the potential slayers. And granted, that's obviously going to have some consequences.
Sure.
You know, there was never going to be a perfect solution to fight the first. But I think what that says is, like, these women don't have to do it alone anymore. And like, we control it. It's no longer controlled by this male patriarchal top-down organization that only sees us as a weapon. Like, we see each other as human beings who have, you know, been selected for this crazy experience in this crazy world, but like, we'll be better if we do it together.
Right.
You know, and it's like, you know, the Faith Buffy conversation towards the end of season 7 as well. You know, when after Faith has been injured and they're in Buffy's room while she's recuperating, and she's like, well, you know, 2 Slayers at once, maybe that's why we could like never get along. And to me, that the ending counteracts that. It was never about the 2 of them being Slayers. It was about the 2 of them, their age, their issues at the time. Like, I think the slaying is the one thing that sort of like connected them to even get them as far as they did. But even with them, there was a lot of that like competition stuff. You know, competition for watcher attention, for friend attention, you know, parental attention.
Right. Because
So,
Faith
yeah,
says, I never, like, had I had the friends that you did, you know, I didn't come with the friends and the mom and all of this other stuff. My life would have been different. And so there's always a comparison. So much so that she switched bodies with Buffy, like so much so that she like literally does a single white female and switches bodies with her to live her life and to take over her life. So I think that there, you know, so there is that thing that's, you know, where I think if you're looking at you know, female empowerment and feminist, you know, thought that's not something that needs to happen. Like, there's no need for that. There shouldn't be a comparison of each other's life and competition, because we can't compete with each other, because because we're all different. And we all bring something different to the table. And so I think that sort of counteracts some of that, some of those thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really excellent point that I never really thought of. Yeah. There could have, that's one area, like, for if you were going to, you know, say here's a great potential for improvement, is more female relationships that uplift each other. Not saying that like they have to get along all the time or that every relationship is perfect. Obviously that's not true. That's not realistic. But like you said, there's a balance between, you know, being human and emotionally realistic, and yet having your female characters at all levels, whether it's, you know, familial, friendships, romantic, you know, come together in more of a supportive environment and not always be in competition with each other.
Right. Because you can call each other on each other's shit. Like, you can challenge each other in a way that keeps people honest and it keeps people accountable, but is not competitive. But overall, I mean, but again, overall, the show is, you know, wonderful. I think the show is wonderful.
I mean, the other thing you could also say is, you know, certainly about the show, is, you know, obviously it's lacking in a lot of intersectionality. It has some moments, but, you know, you have, like we were talked about before, I mean, the main characters are all white. So, you know, white females, they're all of a certain size. You know, you know, so there's not body differences until the 7th season with the potential Slayers.
Right. And even then, very little.
Correct. Yeah. And obviously, you know, there's no characters of color for living in, you know, the coastal Southern California.
Right.
You know, that's certainly not a realistic representation.
So we get, so there's I mean, I think there's a lot of that too. And again, that it's more about the time period and when it was being written and all of that stuff. So there's a lot to
Well, and then on
There's a lot
the,
going into
the
that.
backside of it, which we haven't really discussed is, and this goes to the questions of, representation and having diverse perspectives help make a work of art, particularly one that's collaborative, better. You have a white male showrunner, pretty much all, not 100%, but mostly white writers, a mix of male and female, but I think still more male than female, like the percentages, it's not 50-50. I'm sure that's true if you looked at like, on the production and design and crew side, it would be the same situation. So, that makes an impact as well on the kind of story that's told.
Right. Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, overall, I think obviously it's, there's a lot to get out of it positively about women, about empowerment, about male-female relationships, female-female relationships. And we kind of even haven't really talked as much about Willow and Tara, which, it was only one relationship, but at the time, that representation and that intersectionality of a lesbian couple was very significant.
Yeah.
And it was only just starting to happen on TV. And they did it in such a like beautiful and subtle way. It wasn't like, here's our very special episode where Willow comes out.
Right. Yeah. And
and
yes, and how Buffy handles it too is like, it was so great how she did it, like where it was not a thing, where she was like, you're freaked out by this, and she's like, no. She's like, no, I'm not. It takes her literally like half a second to process the information.
Yeah.
And to course, and then to like see Willow again and be like, yes, I see you.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even think with like Xander or Giles, it was kind of like, okay.
Yeah, it was never a big deal. And, and that is
it was like significant, but it wasn't like we're judging you for it. Big deal.
Right. It's just something new that you're going through her life. And and she does say that, Willow does make comments about it throughout season 4 about, that I'm going through something big and like, this is huge. Like Oz left me, but I found, this new relationship and who I am, and that like, this is huge and I'm discovering something new about myself. And it's not just about the witchcraft. And they, I think sometimes they utilized the witchcraft as sort of a thinly veiled way to talk about her being gay and the homosexuality. There, and again, like this is one of the cringy moments. That's kind of like, I don't know. I think it's in Restless where they're in the dream and
where Xander says,
where Sanders goes,
I knew where you
they
were
do
going
spells.
with this.
They do spells together, and sometimes I like, and then I do a spell on myself. Like there's like that moment that's like, oh gosh, that's really
now that plays
weird.
into like the like male gaze cliche, like two women together is like, ooh, this hot fantasy. Yeah, for sure. And in a way that like, I'm not sure that it added anything to the Restless episode. Like we kind of already knew Xander was that way.
Right. I don't think we needed him to say it.
No.
I was like, I actually prefer that you not just say it. But yeah, I think so. There are those moments that happened. That I think, and then of course there's, there's other things that we'll talk about in other episodes. I think that since feminism and gender is sort of the big bad of our season, there are so many other avenues that we can explore and talk about, and that we will talk about throughout the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about Buffy is it's a complex show, and the issues it tackles, in the ways it does, they're complex in ways it succeeds and doesn't succeed. And so we'll be, delving into that more, not only this season, but hopefully in future seasons, tackling the next thematic big bad.
Yeah. And so there's a I was on a Reddit thread, and this is one of the things. So from somebody who posted, I think the most feminist part of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is that the leading women are all allowed to be complicated. They make mistakes, they hurt other people, they have conflicts, but they also support each other and help each other grow. I just thought that was really nice, and I think it is. I mean, I think that that's ultimately what we're trying to do is figure out a way to support other women. Um, you know, and when we say women, we talk about all women. Um, and how do we support them and what do they need? And how can everyone who does have the power get the power? How do we allow women to find their power and to be able to exert it in the world?
Yeah, and remove the barriers that prevent them from using that power and finding that power.
And those of us who have the power, how do the men in our world become Gileses and and help to clear a path for that, and when necessary, and help guide and be an ally for to strong women everywhere.
Yeah,
Oh, we've got so much more to talk about.
absolutely. Looking forward to it.
So thank you all so much for joining us this week.
Yes, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the discussion. We definitely want to hear your thoughts. If you want to send us an email with your thoughts, questions, concerns, you can email us at abuffypodcast@gmail.com.
We're on Facebook and Instagram at a Buffy podcast. And if you like what you hear, please like and subscribe and download our podcast. We would thoroughly love it. And make sure to leave us a review and send us some stars and some love.
Yeah, let us know what you think.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.